You ended the year wondering why the law of attraction seemed broken, didn't you? You visualized, you affirmed, you prayed to the algorithm of abundance, and yet December arrived with the same empty hands, the same suffocating mediocrity, the same gnawing sense that the universe had somehow forgotten your address. But James Allen, that uncompromising architect of the inner life, delivers a verdict so merciless it stops the breath in your chest. The universe did not give you what you wanted, because the universe does not traffic in fantasies or wishful thinking. It gave you exactly, precisely, mathematically what you were. Not what you claimed to be in your social media manifestos, not what you pretended to be in your moments of desperate optimism, but what you actually were in the silent architecture of your character, in the hidden chambers where your true thoughts breed and multiply like insects in the dark. The law of attraction did not fail you in 2025. You simply misunderstood the law itself, believing it responded to your desires when in truth it responds only to your essence, to the gravitational field generated by the sum total of your disciplined thoughts or your chaotic ones, your integrity or your duplicity, your courage or your cowardice. There exists within you an internal magnet, an invisible force field that radiates outward from the core of your being, and this magnet does not care about your vision boards or your carefully curated intentions. This magnet is composed of your actual character, the real substance of who you have become through 10,000 small choices, through the habits you have tolerated, through the standards you have abandoned when no one was watching. Success, wealth, respect, love, these are not things you pursue like a desperate hunter chasing prey through an endless forest. They are things you attract by becoming the kind of person whose magnetic field naturally pulls them into orbit. But here is the catastrophic truth that most will never confront. If your character is cracked, if it is riddled with the fault lines of indiscipline, if it is contaminated with the poison of resentment, if it is weakened by the corrosion of fear, then your internal magnet is not simply weak, it is reversed. You are actively repelling the very prosperity you claim to desire. You are pushing away opportunity while simultaneously running after it, creating a grotesque paradox where the harder you chase, the faster it flees, because the energy you broadcast is one of desperate lack rather than abundant wholeness. Think of the man who complains constantly about his poverty while simultaneously refusing to honor his word, who breaks promises to himself before breakfast, who indulges every impulse and then wonders why discipline eludes him. His magnet is reversed. He is broadcasting a signal of chaos, and chaos is what returns to him, perfectly, mercilessly, without exception. The universe is not cruel, it is simply precise. It is a mirror that reflects back the exact quality of energy you emit. And if you emit the frequency of a fragmented, undisciplined, resentful character, you will attract circumstances that match that frequency with mathematical exactness. This is why so many people feel cursed, why they believe the game is rigged against them, why they rage against invisible forces that seem determined to keep them down. They have never understood that they themselves are the source of their own repulsion, that their internal magnet has been constructed from materials so flawed that it can only attract more of what they already are: broken, scattered, reactive, weak. The tragedy of the modern world is that millions of people are taught to focus on external techniques, the right affirmations, the perfect routine, the secret formula, while their internal architecture crumbles unexamined. They are trying to build a palace on a foundation of sand, wondering why every structure they erect collapses under the first storm. James Allen understood what our age has forgotten. That character is the foundation of all sustainable success, that everything else is ornament and decoration, and that no amount of external maneuvering can compensate for a rotted core. But today, right now, in this exact moment, we stop chasing. We stop running after phantoms and mirages. We stop believing that one more course, one more book, one more motivational video will somehow magically transform our circumstances while we remain unchanged. Today, we enter the workshop of the soul, that sacred and terrifying place where the real work happens, where transformation is not a slogan but a meticulous, disciplined, sometimes painful process of demolition and reconstruction. We are going to identify the rotten bricks in your foundation, the poisoned thoughts that have been masquerading as innocent observations, the weak habits that have been slowly undermining your entire structure, the gaps between your words and your deeds that have fractured your soul into 1,000 contradictory pieces. We are going to learn the law of character architecture, that ancient and unforgiving science that James Allen mastered and encoded for those brave enough to apply it. This is not about positive thinking in the shallow sense that phrase has come to mean in our infantilized culture. This is about rebuilding the man from the ground up, brick by brick, thought by thought, choice by choice, until you become someone that 2026 must obey, someone whose internal magnet is so powerful and so precisely calibrated that success, wealth, and respect flow toward you not because you chased them, but because you finally became worthy of them. The calendar will turn to 2026 whether you do this work or not, but the question that should keep you awake tonight is this: will you enter the new year as the same cracked vessel that leaked away every opportunity in 2025, or will you enter as an architect, someone who has taken full responsibility for the construction site of his own soul? The choice, as always, is yours. But understand this: there are no shortcuts in the workshop of character, no hacks, no life-changing secrets that allow you to bypass the labor. There is only the work itself and the man you become through doing it. Let us begin. Your mind is a construction site, and it has been one since the moment you became conscious, though most people live their entire lives without ever recognizing this fundamental truth. Every single thought you entertain today, every passing judgment, every moment of self-pity, every flash of resentment, every whisper of fear, every spark of courage, every glimmer of hope, was a brick laid in the wall of your destiny. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but actually and literally in terms of the causal chains that govern how reality unfolds. This is the first great teaching of the law of character architecture. You are always building, whether you intend to or not, whether you are aware of it or not. There is no neutral state, no pause button, no moment when the construction stops. Even in sleep, your subconscious mind continues to process and solidify the materials you fed it during your waking hours. Consider the implications of this with the full weight of your attention. If you spent today ruminating on past failures, you laid bricks of defeat into your foundation. If you spent the day comparing yourself unfavorably to others, you laid bricks of inadequacy into your walls. If you spent the day entertaining fantasies of revenge or nursing old grievances, you laid bricks of bitterness that will poison the entire structure. But if you spent even an hour disciplining your thoughts toward gratitude, toward possibility, toward the solutions rather than the problems, toward what you can control rather than what you cannot, you laid bricks of strength and coherence. The building rises either way, but the question is, what manner of structure are you creating? Is it a temple that can withstand the storms of fortune, or is it a shack that collapses at the first test? James Allen understood that most people are unconscious builders, which is to say they are terrible builders. They lay bricks randomly without plan or purpose, using whatever materials happen to be lying around in their environment. They allow their minds to be construction sites invaded by every passing influence. The news media dumps a load of fear bricks on their site. Social media delivers a shipment of envy bricks. Their family's dysfunctional patterns contribute some shame bricks. Their own undisciplined habits add procrastination bricks, and they wonder why the resulting structure is unstable, why it cannot support the weight of their ambitions, why it seems to attract disaster rather than success. The unconscious builder is always at the mercy of his materials because he never learned to be selective, never learned that the first and most important skill of an architect is the ability to refuse the thought that weakens, to refuse the narrative that diminishes, to refuse the emotional indulgence that corrodes. This is not toxic positivity, that shallow practice of papering over real problems with false cheerfulness. This is something far more rigorous and demanding. It is the moment-by-moment discipline of examining each thought as it approaches your mind and asking, if I allow this thought to become a brick in my character, will it strengthen or weaken the structure I am trying to build? Most thoughts fail this test. Most of what parades through the average person's mind in a given day is gossip, worry, resentment, fantasy, and self-justification, all of which are rotted materials that will weaken any structure they touch. The cathedral metaphor is not chosen lightly. Think of the great cathedrals of Europe, structures that took centuries to complete, where each stone was carefully selected, shaped, and placed with absolute precision. The architects who designed these buildings understood that every element mattered, that there could be no carelessness, no cutting corners, no using inferior materials, just because they were convenient or cheap. Your character is such a cathedral. But unlike those stone monuments, you are both the architect and the construction crew. You must be simultaneously the visionary who holds the blueprint and the laborer who does the daily work of implementation. You must learn to see your thoughts not as random events that happen to you, but as building materials that you either accept or reject based on their quality and suitability. This means developing what we might call selective vigilance, a state of constant but not exhausting awareness where a part of your consciousness is always monitoring the quality of your mental materials. When a thought of self-pity arises, why does this always happen to me? The vigilant architect recognizes it instantly as a rotted brick and refuses it entry to the construction site. When a thought of blame arises, if only they had done their part, I would be successful, the architect sees the weakness in this material and casts it aside. When a thought of fear-based projection arises, this will probably fail like everything else. The architect understands that building with such materials guarantees the very failure being predicted. But selective vigilance is not merely negative, not merely about rejection and refusal. It is equally about the active selection of superior materials. When you catch yourself beginning to complain, the vigilant architect intervenes and redirects that mental energy toward problem solving. When you catch yourself beginning to compare your progress unfavorably to another's, the vigilant architect transforms that energy into curiosity about what that person did that you might learn from. When you catch yourself beginning to rehearse old resentments, the vigilant architect converts that energy into forgiveness or at minimum into indifference, understanding that carrying such bricks will only weigh down the structure you are trying to elevate. This is exhausting work at first, because you have spent years, perhaps decades, being an unconscious builder. You have allowed your construction site to become a dumping ground for every toxic thought pattern that drifted by. The accumulated debris is enormous, and the habit of indiscriminate acceptance is deeply ingrained. But here is what Alan understood and what you must internalize. The work becomes easier, not harder, as you progress. The vigilant architect develops what we might call material recognition speed, the ability to identify inferior thoughts almost instantly and redirect them before they even fully form. What took conscious effort in month 1 becomes semi-automatic by month 6 and fully automatic by year 1. The master builder can walk through his day with his mind in a state of constant curation, accepting only those thoughts that strengthen his character, rejecting all those that weaken it, and doing so with such fluidity that it no longer feels like work, but rather like breathing. This is the state we are building toward, but you must begin where you are, which for most people means beginning with the shocking recognition of just how polluted their mental construction site has become. Do not be discouraged by this recognition. Every master architect began by surveying a disaster zone and thinking, I have so much work to do. The difference between the master and the amateur is that the master did the work anyway, brick by brick, day by day, without drama and without surrender. Your mind is a cathedral under construction, and you are the architect. Will you build it from rotted wood and crumbling stone, or will you select materials of such quality that the structure stands for lifetimes? Will you allow every random thought to become part of your foundation, or will you become ruthlessly selective, understanding that your destiny is quite literally being constructed from the substance of your daily thinking? These are not rhetorical questions designed to inspire you. They are diagnostic questions designed to confront you with the reality of your current practice and the necessity of its transformation. The construction site never closes. The work never stops. But you can, starting today, starting right now in this very moment, begin to build like an architect rather than like a careless amateur. You can begin to refuse the rotted bricks of weak thinking. You can begin to select thoughts of such quality that the character you build becomes a magnet for everything you have been chasing. This is the first law, and it is unforgiving. You become what you repeatedly think, not what you occasionally wish, not what you desperately hope, but what you repeatedly, consistently, daily think. If your thinking is weak, your character will be weak, and your results will be weak. If your thinking is strong, disciplined, and carefully selected, your character will become an unshakable fortress, and your results will reflect that strength. The choice of materials is yours. The responsibility is yours. The work is yours. And if you do it, if you really do it with the level of commitment and vigilance it requires, the cathedral you build will be worthy of the destiny you claim to desire. But even the finest bricks, even the most carefully selected thoughts cannot build a stable structure if they are laid without mortar, without the binding agent that holds them together and transforms individual elements into a unified whole. This is where most builders fail catastrophically. They understand perhaps the need for good materials, but they do not understand the law that governs how those materials must be combined. The mortar that binds thought bricks into character walls is something that James Allen identified with surgical precision. It is the absolute, uncompromising coherence between your word and your deed, between your intention and your action, between who you say you are and who you actually are when no one is watching. Without this coherence, without this alignment, you are not building a character at all. You are simply stacking disconnected bricks that will topple at the first strong wind. This is the law of unshakable logic, and it operates with the inevitability of mathematics. You cannot have a fragmented self and expect integrated results. You cannot be one person in your promises and another person in your actions and expect the universe to reward you with success. The gap between your word and your deed is not a small thing, not a minor inconsistency that can be overlooked or rationalized away. It is a fracture that runs through the entire foundation of your being, and every time you widen that gap, every time you say you will do something and then you do not, every time you claim to value something and then act in opposition to that value, you are essentially taking a sledgehammer to your own character and wondering why it keeps crumbling beneath you. Consider the man who says he wants financial freedom but cannot be trusted to save even a small percentage of his income. Consider the man who says he values his health but consistently chooses immediate gratification over long-term vitality. Consider the man who says he desires respect but lies casually, breaks commitments thoughtlessly, and acts without integrity in the small moments when he believes no one will notice. This man is not building a character. He is performing a kind of theater, putting on a show of having values and ambitions, while the actual structure of his soul remains chaotic, contradictory, and weak. The universe sees through this performance instantly, because the universe does not respond to your proclaimed intentions. It responds to your demonstrated patterns. This is why the law of attraction seems to fail for so many people. They visualize wealth, while their daily actions demonstrate poverty consciousness. They affirm abundance, while their moment-to-moment choices reveal a mindset of scarcity and fear. They declare themselves disciplined, while their actual behavior is a cascade of broken promises and abandoned commitments. The gap between the stated desire and the lived reality creates a kind of static, a dissonance that scrambles the signal of their internal magnet. Instead of broadcasting a clear, coherent frequency that attracts what they want, they broadcast confusion, and confusion is what returns to them in the form of stalled progress, missed opportunities, and circumstances that seem randomly chaotic. James Allen understood that this gap between word and deed is not merely a practical problem, but a spiritual crisis. When you tell yourself you will wake up at a certain time and then you do not, you are not simply failing at time management, you are teaching yourself at the deepest level that your word means nothing, that you cannot be trusted, that you are fundamentally unreliable. When this lesson is repeated daily across dozens of small promises and commitments, it creates what we might call soul fragmentation, a state where you no longer experience yourself as a unified being, but rather as a collection of conflicting impulses and desires that are perpetually at war with one another. The fragmented soul cannot generate a coherent magnetic field. It cannot attract success because it does not broadcast the signal of a trustworthy, reliable, integrated human being. The solution to this crisis is not complex, but it is brutally demanding. You must close the coherence gap through the practice of absolute self-governance, starting not with your biggest goals, but with your smallest promises. If you tell yourself you will meditate for 5 minutes tomorrow morning, you must do it, regardless of how you feel when tomorrow morning arrives, regardless of what excuses your mind generates, regardless of whether it seems important in the moment. The size of the promise is irrelevant. What matters is that you demonstrate to yourself that your word is law, that when you commit to something, it happens, not sometimes, not when convenient, but always. This is agonizing work for most people because they have spent years or decades in a pattern of casual self-betrayal. They make commitments lightly and break them just as lightly, telling themselves it doesn't really matter, that they will do better tomorrow, that external circumstances prevented them from following through. Every rationalization, every excuse, every minimization of a broken promise is another application of the sledgehammer to your character's foundation. You are teaching yourself that you are not to be taken seriously, that your commitments are suggestions rather than laws, and then you wonder why the world does not take you seriously, why your ambitions remain fantasies, why respect and success continue to elude you. The architect understands that self-governance is the prerequisite for all other forms of governance. If you cannot govern your own impulse to hit the snooze button, you cannot govern a business. If you cannot govern your own tendency to procrastinate when a task is difficult, you cannot govern money. If you cannot govern your own emotional reactions when someone challenges you, you cannot govern relationships or teams. The man who is at the mercy of his own undisciplined impulses is not ready for success, because success requires the ability to act according to principle rather than feeling, to operate from a place of chosen values rather than reactive emotion. But when you begin to close the coherence gap, when you begin to demonstrate through action that your word to yourself is binding and absolute, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to experience what might be called the solidification effect, where your character begins to harden into something stable and reliable. The fragmented self begins to unify. The scattered energies begin to coalesce. You start to trust yourself because you have a track record of keeping promises to yourself. And this self-trust radiates outward as a kind of quiet confidence that others can sense even if they cannot articulate what they are sensing. This is magnetic charisma in its truest form, not the fake enthusiasm of the motivational speaker, not the borrowed confidence of the person who is pretending, but the authentic presence of someone who is internally aligned, who is the same person in private as in public, who does not need to remember what lies he told because he tells no lies. The world rewards this coherence instinctively and inevitably. Opportunities begin to appear because people can sense that you are someone who follows through, someone whose commitments mean something, someone who can be trusted with responsibility. Money flows more easily because you have demonstrated to yourself and to the universe that you can be trusted to manage resources wisely. Respect accumulates because you have become someone who respects himself enough to govern his own behavior. These are not mystical outcomes. They are the logical consequences of operating according to the law of unshakable logic. But you must understand, this law is unforgiving. It does not make exceptions. It does not reward good intentions or punish bad luck. It simply reflects back to you the exact quality of coherence or incoherence that you demonstrate in your daily life. If you are internally fragmented, you will attract external chaos. If you are internally unified, you will attract external order. There is no way to fake this, no shortcut around it, no technique or strategy that allows you to bypass the necessity of becoming a person whose word and deed are one. The gap between your word and your deed is the most accurate predictor of your future that exists. If that gap is wide, your future will be filled with disappointment and failure, regardless of your talents or your opportunities. If that gap is narrow or non-existent, your future will unfold with a kind of inevitability towards success, regardless of your starting point or your circumstances. This is the unshakable logic that James Allen understood, and that you must now internalize if you are serious about rebuilding your internal magnet. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you lay mortar. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you remove mortar. The structure you are building is only as strong as the binding agent you use to hold it together. And that binding agent is forged from the thousands of small moments when you choose alignment over convenience, when you choose integrity over comfort, when you choose to be someone whose word means something. This is not glamorous work. It will not make for exciting social media content. But it is the only work that actually transforms character, and character is the only thing that transforms destiny. Now we must descend deeper into the mechanics of failure, into that shadowy territory where most people's magnets do not merely weaken, but actively reverse themselves, creating the catastrophic condition where they repel the very things they most desperately desire. This phenomenon, this reversal of polarity, does not happen accidentally or randomly. It is the direct and inevitable result of what James Allen identified as the soul disorders, those interior contradictions and misalignments that fragment a person's being into warring factions. When your soul is disordered, when there is civil war raging inside you between what you want and what you do, between what you say and what you believe, between your conscious aspirations and your unconscious patterns, you create a magnetic field so chaotic and contradictory that it cannot attract coherent results. The first and most devastating soul disorder is what we might call the coherence gap, that abyss between your proclaimed identity and your demonstrated behavior. You say you are disciplined, but your days are a chaos of abandoned plans and broken routines. You say you are ambitious, but your hours are consumed by distraction and comfort-seeking. You say you value growth, but you flee from every challenge that requires discomfort or sustained effort. This gap is not merely a behavioral inconsistency, it is an existential fracture that splits you into multiple selves, each contradicting the others, each broadcasting a different frequency, the sum total of which is a garbled signal that the universe cannot respond to with anything but confusion and stagnation. Consider the psychological mechanics of this with full attention. Every time you declare an intention and then fail to act on it, you are not simply failing at a task, you are teaching your subconscious mind a devastating lesson about your fundamental nature. You are programming yourself at the deepest level with the understanding that you are someone who cannot be trusted, someone whose declarations are meaningless, someone whose commitments evaporate the moment they become inconvenient. This subconscious programming creates what we might call the betrayal loop, where each broken promise makes the next promise easier to break, where each abandoned commitment reinforces the neural pathway of abandonment until you become someone who can no longer believe your own intentions even as you state them. The man caught in the betrayal loop lives in a state of permanent internal conflict. A part of him genuinely wants to change, to become disciplined, to achieve his goals. But a deeper part, the part that has been trained through repetition that his word means nothing, does not believe change is possible. This deeper part sabotages every new initiative before it can gain momentum. It whispers all the familiar justifications. You have tried this before and failed, so why would this time be different? Or you are too far behind to catch up now, or you deserve a break after such a hard day. These are not random thoughts. They are the voice of your fragmented soul trying to maintain the status quo, trying to protect you from the disappointment of another broken promise by preventing you from making the promise in the first place. The tragedy is that most people never identify this mechanism. They experience its effects, the procrastination, the self-sabotage, the mysterious inability to follow through on what they know they should do, but they attribute these effects to external causes or to some inherent character flaw they believe they were born with. I am just not a disciplined person, they tell themselves, as if discipline were a genetic trait rather than a skill built through practice. I am just not good with money, as if financial intelligence were distributed at birth rather than learned through study and application. These false beliefs, these lies we tell ourselves to avoid the responsibility of change, are themselves soul disorders that widen the coherence gap and reverse the polarity of our internal magnets. James Allen understood that the cure for soul disorders is not affirmation or visualization or any other technique that operates solely at the level of conscious thought. The cure is governance, the establishment of absolute sovereignty over your own behavior through the systematic practice of keeping small promises. Not grand declarations, not dramatic transformations, but small daily commitments that you honor, regardless of feeling or circumstance. If you commit to writing for 15 minutes each morning, you write for 15 minutes each morning, even on the days when every cell in your body resists, even on the days when it feels pointless, even on the days when you would rather do literally anything else. The content of the commitment is almost irrelevant. What matters is the act of honoring it, the demonstration to yourself that you are becoming someone whose word is law. This practice of small-scale self-governance has an effect that seems disproportionate to its apparent simplicity. Each time you honor a small commitment, you send a signal to your subconscious mind that contradicts the betrayal loop's programming. You demonstrate that you are capable of change, that your word can mean something, that you are not doomed to be a person who merely reacts to impulse and circumstance. At first, this signal is weak, easily drowned out by years of contrary evidence. But with repetition, with daily practice, the signal strengthens. The neural pathways of reliability begin to form and solidify. The subconscious mind, which learns primarily through repetition rather than through reasoning, begins to accept the new pattern as the new normal. Over time, and you must be patient with this process because it cannot be rushed, the coherence gap begins to close. The distance between who you say you are and who you actually are begins to shrink. The civil war inside your soul begins to cease as the warring factions unify under the banner of self-governance. And as this internal unification occurs, as your being becomes more coherent and less fragmented, your magnetic field strengthens and stabilizes. You begin to broadcast a clear signal, and the universe begins to respond to that signal with matching circumstances and opportunities. But understand, this process is not comfortable. The disordered soul does not surrender its patterns easily. When you first begin to practice real self-governance, you will encounter fierce internal resistance. Your mind will generate an endless stream of reasons why this particular commitment does not really matter, why you can skip it just this once, why external circumstances make it impossible to follow through today. These are not rational objections. They are the death throes of your old pattern, the desperate attempt of your disordered soul to maintain its familiar chaos rather than submit to the order you are trying to impose. You must learn to recognize this resistance for what it is and to push through it without negotiation or compromise. The moment you begin to debate with yourself about whether you really need to honor a commitment, you have already lost. The whole point of self-governance is that you act according to principle rather than feeling, that you operate from a place of chosen values rather than momentary mood. If you only keep commitments when they feel easy or convenient, you are not practicing self-governance at all. You are simply following your impulses, which is what you have always done and what has led you to your current state of disorder. The disordered soul cannot command a disordered world. This principle is absolute. If you cannot govern your own behavior, if you cannot close the gap between your word and your deed, if you cannot heal the civil war inside yourself, then it does not matter how many techniques you learn or how many opportunities you encounter. You will sabotage them all through the chaotic signal your reversed magnet broadcasts. But if you begin the work of soul governance, if you commit to the daily practice of keeping small promises, if you have the courage to face the discomfort of internal resistance and push through it anyway, you will begin to repair your internal magnet. The repair is slow. It happens brick by brick, day by day, promise by promise. There are no dramatic breakthroughs, no moments when suddenly everything changes. There is only the accumulation of small victories, the gradual closing of the coherence gap, the steady unification of your fragmented self into a coherent whole. But this slow repair is the only real transformation that exists. Everything else is theater, temporary enthusiasm that fades the moment it encounters real resistance. You are building the capacity to govern yourself, and from that capacity, all other forms of mastery and success will flow. The world instinctively recognizes and rewards the person who has achieved internal coherence, because such a person is rare, valuable, and inherently trustworthy. Money flows toward those who can be trusted to manage it wisely. Opportunities flow toward those who can be trusted to execute them reliably. Respect flows toward those who respect themselves enough to govern their own behavior. These are not rewards you chase or demand. They are the natural consequences of closing the coherence gap and repairing your internal magnet. If you cannot govern your impulse to procrastinate, you cannot govern money. If you cannot govern your tendency to break small promises, you cannot govern relationships. If you cannot govern your own emotional reactivity, you cannot govern teams or businesses or any form of external power. The sovereignty you seek in the world can only flow from the sovereignty you establish over yourself, and that sovereignty is built through the unglamorous, daily practice of self-governance. This is the cure for soul disorders. Not positive thinking, not visualization, not affirmation, but governance. The systematic, relentless, non-negotiable practice of keeping your word to yourself in small things so that eventually, inevitably, you become someone whose word means something in large things as well. But self-governance, while necessary, is not sufficient by itself to rebuild a magnet powerful enough to attract the destiny you claim to desire. You can close the coherence gap. You can become someone whose word and deed align perfectly, and yet still wonder why success seems to elude you, why wealth and respect remain just beyond reach. This is because there is a second element required to forge an unshakable character, a second law that operates in parallel with self-governance and that multiplies its effects exponentially. This element is what James Allen called organized consistency, and without it, even the most disciplined person remains trapped in a kind of directionless motion, expending tremendous energy but generating minimal forward momentum toward any meaningful destination. Organized consistency is not simply doing things regularly. It is doing the right things regularly, aligning your daily actions with a clear understanding of what actually produces the results you seek, and then executing those actions with machine-like reliability over extended periods of time. Most people fail here not because they are lazy, but because they are scattered. They work hard, sometimes exhausting themselves with effort, but their efforts are dispersed across too many directions, pulled by too many competing priorities, diluted by constant context switching and distraction. They are like a powerful river that has been diverted into 1,000 small streams, each one too weak to carve through rock, whereas if that same water were concentrated into a single channel, it would cut through mountains. Consider the man who wants to build wealth. He reads constantly, jumping from one financial strategy to another, dabbling in stocks one week, considering real estate the next, entertaining cryptocurrency the week after that, never committing deeply enough to any single approach to become truly competent at it. He attends seminars, watches videos, fills notebooks with ideas, and yet 5 years later, he is no wealthier than when he started because his energy has been dispersed rather than concentrated. He has been busy, even frantically busy, but his busyness has been unorganized, lacking the focused consistency that compounds into real results. Organized consistency requires first that you identify with brutal clarity what the actual high-leverage activities are in your domain, the specific actions that, when performed repeatedly over time, will inevitably produce the outcomes you desire. This identification requires study, requires learning from those who have already achieved what you seek to achieve, requires the humility to admit that your current guesses about what works are probably wrong. Most people skip this step entirely. They operate based on assumption and wishful thinking, rather than on a clear understanding of the causal mechanics of success in their chosen field. Once you have identified the high-leverage activities, organized consistency demands that you build systems and routines that ensure these activities happen with clock-like regularity, regardless of your emotional state, regardless of whether you feel inspired or motivated, regardless of what is happening in other areas of your life. This is where most people fail, even when they have correctly identified what needs to be done. They understand intellectually that they should be doing X every day, but they wait for the right mood, for the right circumstances, for the stars to align before they take action. They make their execution conditional on their feelings, which means their execution becomes sporadic and unreliable. The architect who practices organized consistency does not wait for motivation. He has structured his life in such a way that the high-leverage activities happen automatically, not because he feels like doing them, but because they are built into the non-negotiable architecture of his day. If wealth building requires reading and implementing lessons from one business book per week, then his calendar contains a blocked 2-hour session every Sunday morning dedicated to this task. And this session happens regardless of what else is going on, regardless of whether he is tired, regardless of whether he would rather be doing something else. The consistency is organized into his schedule, making it inevitable rather than optional. This level of organization and consistency creates what we might call the compound effect, where small advantages multiply over time into overwhelming superiority. The man who reads and implements one business book per week consistently for 5 years has processed and applied insights from 260 books, while his competitor who reads sporadically might have processed 20. The gap in knowledge, in practical wisdom, in executed strategies is not small. It is enormous, perhaps insurmountable. And yet the daily difference between these two men was modest, a few hours per week, consistently applied versus randomly applied. James Allen understood that true confidence, not the fake bravado that crumbles under pressure, but the quiet, unshakable confidence that radiates from certain people, is not an emotion at all, but rather the natural residue of organized consistency. You cannot feel confident if you cannot trust yourself, and you cannot trust yourself if your track record is one of sporadic effort and abandoned commitments. But when you have demonstrated to yourself over months and years that you are someone who identifies the right actions and then executes them with machine-like reliability, confidence becomes inevitable. You trust yourself because you have earned that trust through your track record. This self-trust is what the world senses and responds to. When you meet someone who has achieved real organized consistency, someone who has been executing their high-leverage activities daily for years, you can feel the difference even if you cannot articulate what you are feeling. There is a solidity to such people, a sense that they are not going to be blown off course by the winds of circumstance, a quiet certainty that they will continue doing what they do regardless of external conditions. This solidity is magnetic. It attracts opportunity, attracts partnership, attracts resources, attracts respect. But achieving this level of organized consistency requires solving a problem that most people never address, the problem of decision fatigue and willpower depletion. If you are making fresh decisions every day about whether to execute your high-leverage activities, you will fail more often than you succeed, because willpower is a finite resource that gets depleted through use. The person who relies on willpower to force themselves through their important tasks is fighting an uphill battle every single day, and eventually, inevitably, they will lose that battle on a day when they are tired or stressed or dealing with some crisis. The solution is to make the high-leverage activities automatic through routine rather than relying on willpower to force them into existence each day. This is why the world's most successful people are often obsessive about routine and ritual, not because they are rigid or uncreative, but because they understand that routines bypass the willpower problem entirely. If you have a routine where you write every morning from 6 to 8, you do not need to decide whether to write on any given morning. You simply follow the routine. The decision has already been made, encoded into your daily structure, leaving your limited willpower reserves available for the actual work of writing well, rather than being depleted on the decision of whether to write at all. Building these routines, these systems of organized consistency, requires an initial investment of energy and attention. You must study your own patterns, understand when you have the most energy and focus during the day, design your schedule to place high-leverage activities during your peak hours, and then protect those hours with absolute ruthlessness against all competing demands. This is not glamorous work. It is unglamorous, administrative, boring even. But it is the difference between being someone who occasionally does important work when inspired and being someone who inevitably produces important work because their life is structured to make production automatic. Over time, as these routines become habitual, they require less and less conscious effort to maintain. What felt difficult in month 1 becomes merely normal by month 6 and feels effortless by month 12. You have essentially programmed yourself at a neurological level to execute your high-leverage activities without conscious decision-making. This is the state of mastery, where what others see as discipline you experience as simply what you do, as natural as breathing. The compound effects of this organized consistency become staggering over time. Small daily advantages become monthly advantages. Monthly advantages become yearly advantages. Yearly advantages become decade-long advantages that are essentially impossible for competitors to overcome. The person who has been executing their high-leverage activities with organized consistency for 10 years is not competing in the same arena as the person who works sporadically. They are operating at an entirely different level of capability and opportunity. But you must begin. You must identify your high-leverage activities, design the routines that ensure their execution, and then protect those routines with ferocity. You must become someone who does what needs to be done when it needs to be done, regardless of how you feel about it in the moment. This is not sacrifice, this is liberation. You are freeing yourself from the tyranny of mood and circumstance, establishing sovereignty over your own behavior, and building a magnet so powerful and so consistently operational that success becomes not a hope, but an inevitability. The world does not reward talent or intelligence, or even hard work in the abstract. The world rewards organized consistency, the application of the right actions repeatedly over time until results compound into undeniable success. This is the steel beam you install in your character, the unbreakable element that allows you to withstand pressure, to persist through difficulty, to continue building even when progress is invisible. And when you have installed this beam, when you have become someone whose organized consistency is simply who you are, rather than something you do, your internal magnet reaches full power and begins to pull toward you everything you have been chasing. There is a deception at the heart of how most people understand and pursue confidence, a deception so pervasive and so damaging that it must be named and demolished before we can proceed further into the architecture of character. The modern world has taught you that confidence is an emotional state, a feeling you generate through self-talk and positive affirmations, a mood you can conjure by looking in the mirror and declaring yourself powerful or worthy or capable. This is not only wrong, it is a lie that keeps you trapped in a cycle of manufactured enthusiasm that evaporates the moment it encounters real resistance or challenge. True confidence is not an emotion at all, and it cannot be generated through psychological tricks or motivational techniques, no matter how sophisticated those techniques might appear. James Allen understood what our shallow age has forgotten. Confidence is a conclusion, not a feeling. It is the logical and inevitable result of having demonstrated to yourself, through repeated action, that you are someone who can be trusted to execute what you commit to executing. It is the residue, the byproduct, the natural consequence of what we might call a track record of reliability. When you have kept promises to yourself for days that became weeks, that became months, that became years, when you have demonstrated through your behavior that you are someone who follows through regardless of difficulty or discomfort, you do not need to feel confident. You simply are confident because you have evidence, unassailable evidence that you are capable and reliable. Consider the mechanics of this with precision. The man who has never written consistently tries to convince himself he is a writer through affirmations and vision boards, declaring to his mirror each morning that he is prolific and talented. But when he sits down to the actual work of writing, when he encounters the resistance and difficulty that all writing entails, his manufactured confidence dissolves instantly because it was never real. It was a performance, a costume he put on without doing the work to earn it. By contrast, the man who has written every single day for 2 years does not need to affirm his identity as a writer. He simply knows he is a writer because the evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. He has written through days when he felt inspired and days when he felt nothing. Through days when the work came easily and days when every sentence was a battle, and this track record gives him a foundation of confidence that cannot be shaken by mood or circumstance. This is the doctrine of confidence as result, rather than as cause, and internalizing this doctrine will save you from years of wasted effort trying to manufacture feelings instead of building capability. You do not become confident and then take action. You take action, and through the accumulation of successful executions, confidence emerges as a natural byproduct. The sequence is absolute and cannot be reversed. All attempts to generate confidence before establishing a track record are forms of self-deception, ways of trying to skip the actual work of building capability and reliability. But what constitutes a track record of reliability? It is not grand achievements or public successes, though these may come as consequences. It is the accumulation of kept promises in the small, private moments when no one is watching and there is no external reward. It is getting up when your alarm sounds, even when your bed is warm and your body is tired. It is sitting down to your important work during your designated time, even when you would rather be doing anything else. It is speaking truthfully, even when a lie would be more convenient. It is maintaining your standards even when loosening them would provide immediate relief. Each of these small acts of reliability is a deposit into what we might call your self-trust account. Most people have deeply overdrawn accounts. Their history is one of broken promises and abandoned commitments, and so when they attempt something new, they do not believe in their own ability to follow through because they have no evidence that follow-through is something they do. Their past performance predicts future failure, and their subconscious knows this even if their conscious mind tries to pretend otherwise with affirmations and positive thinking. But the person who has been making consistent deposits into their self-trust account through years of small-scale reliability has accumulated capital that compounds into unshakable confidence. They have trained themselves at a neurological level to be someone who executes, and this training shows up as calm certainty when they face new challenges. They do not question whether they will follow through, because follow-through has become their default mode of operation. They do not worry whether they have the discipline to persist, because discipline is no longer something they do. It is something they are. This transformation from doing to being is the goal of all character architecture. You are not trying to learn discipline, you are trying to become disciplined. You are not trying to practice reliability, you are trying to become reliable. The difference is not semantic. It is the difference between a costume you put on and a bone structure you grow. The costume can be removed when circumstances make it inconvenient. The bone structure is permanent, integrated into who you are at such a fundamental level that operating any other way would feel strange and wrong. James Allen called this integrated state of being organized consistency internalized, where the practices and disciplines that once required conscious effort have become so habitual that they operate automatically. At this level, you do not use willpower to force yourself to execute your important work. You simply execute it because that is what you do, as natural and automatic as breathing. And from this internalized consistency comes a form of confidence that is qualitatively different from the manufactured enthusiasm of motivational culture. It is quiet rather than loud, certain rather than insistent, rooted in evidence rather than hope. This quiet confidence is what the world recognizes as authentic power. When you encounter someone who possesses it, you can sense immediately that they are not performing or pretending. They do not need to convince you of their capability, because their capability radiates from them as a kind of calm certainty. They do not make grand declarations about what they will accomplish, because they are too busy accomplishing it. They do not seek validation or approval, because they have validated themselves through their track record of execution. This is the confidence that attracts wealth, opportunity, and respect. Not because you project it artificially, or because you have learned to fake it until you make it, but because you have genuinely become someone whose internal magnet is calibrated through organized consistency to attract these outcomes naturally. The universe, or more precisely the other humans who make up the social and economic systems you navigate, can sense the difference between authentic capability built through consistent action and fake confidence manufactured through psychological manipulation. The path to this authentic confidence is clear but demanding. You must begin where you are, regardless of how overdrawn your self-trust account might currently be. You must start making small deposits through the keeping of small promises, understanding that each kept promise is a brick in the foundation of your future confidence. You must be patient with the process because the deposits compound slowly at first, requiring months of consistent reliability before you notice any shift in how you feel about your own capability. But if you persist, if you continue making deposits day after day without dramatizing the difficulty, or celebrating the small wins excessively, you will reach a tipping point where the accumulated evidence of your reliability becomes so overwhelming that confidence ceases to be something you have to work for and becomes simply what you experience as a natural consequence of who you have become. At this point, your internal magnet reaches a level of power that begins to bend circumstances toward your desired outcomes, not through mystical attraction, but through the practical mechanisms of how opportunity flows toward those who have demonstrated reliability and capability. You do not need to feel confident right now. You only need to begin making deposits into your self-trust account through the keeping of small promises. The confidence will come, not because you affirmed it or visualized it, but because you earned it through the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone whose word to yourself is law and whose track record proves it. But there is a second element to the confidence equation that operates in parallel with your track record of reliability, an element that multiplies the power of that track record and transforms it from personal capability into social magnetism. This element is what James Allen identified as the steel beam of character, the unshakable core principle or identity around which all your other traits and behaviors organize themselves. Without this steel beam, you remain someone who executes tasks well, but lacks the gravitational force to attract significant opportunity, respect, or wealth. With it, you become a person that others instinctively trust and want to align themselves with, not because you have manipulated their perception, but because you have built something genuinely solid that they can sense, even if they cannot articulate what they are sensing. The steel beam is forged through what we might call identity-level commitment, a decision about who you are at such a fundamental level that all your behaviors flow from that identity naturally, rather than having to be forced through willpower. Most people operate at the level of goal setting and behavior modification, saying, "I want to write a book," or "I should exercise more," without ever establishing the deeper identity from which these behaviors would flow naturally. They are trying to force behaviors that contradict their self-concept, which is why the behaviors require constant willpower to maintain and eventually collapse back into old patterns when willpower depletes. By contrast, the person who establishes identity-level commitment says not "I want to write," but "I am a writer," and then ruthlessly aligns all their behaviors with that identity. When faced with a choice about how to spend their time, they do not ask, "What do I feel like doing?" but rather, "What would a writer do in this situation?" The identity becomes a decision-making heuristic that simplifies all subsequent choices. A writer writes daily, so they write daily. A writer prioritizes their craft over distractions, so they eliminate distractions ruthlessly. A writer continues even when inspiration is absent, so they sit at the keyboard even on days when every word feels like pulling teeth. This identity-based approach to behavior creates what we might call behavioral coherence, where everything you do aligns with and reinforces a central self-concept. There is no internal conflict, no gap between who you claim to be and how you actually behave, because your behaviors are not things you force yourself to do. They are expressions of who you are. This coherence is what others sense as authenticity, and what transforms personal capability into magnetic attractiveness. James Allen understood that the steel beam is not built through a single dramatic decision, but through thousands of small moments where you choose the behavior that aligns with your declared identity, even when a contradictory choice would be easier or more pleasant. Each of these moments is a strike of the hammer against the steel, hardening it, strengthening it, making it more resistant to bending under pressure. Over time, the beam becomes so solid that it defines your character in the way that a spine defines a body's structure. It is the element around which everything else organizes itself, the element that provides structural integrity even under extreme stress. Consider what happens to the person who has forged this steel beam through years of identity-aligned behavior. They encounter a setback, a failed project, a financial loss, a betrayal by someone they trusted. The person without a steel beam is devastated by such events because their sense of self was never solidly established. They spiral into self-doubt, questioning whether they are capable or worthy, and often abandon their path entirely. But the person with a steel beam experiences the same setback differently. They feel the disappointment and frustration, certainly, But these emotions do not shake their fundamental identity. They are still who they are: a builder, a creator, an entrepreneur, whatever identity they have forged. And builders build even after failures. Creators create even after rejections. Entrepreneurs persist even after losses. This resilience is not psychological toughness, in the sense of gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to continue. It is structural integrity, where your identity is so solidly established that temporary setbacks cannot crack it. You continue not because you are forcing yourself through willpower, but because continuing is what someone with your identity does. The behavior flows from the being, rather than being imposed upon it from outside. This is the confidence that the world instinctively trusts and rewards. When someone encounters a person who has forged a steel beam, they sense that this person will not be easily deterred, will not fold under pressure, will not abandon their commitments when circumstances become difficult. This sensing happens below the level of conscious awareness. It is not something people articulate to themselves, but rather something they feel and respond to instinctively. They want to do business with such people, because such people can be trusted to execute. They want to invest in such people because such people will persist through the inevitable challenges. They want to align themselves with such people because such people provide stability in an unstable world. The process of forging your steel beam begins with a single question that you must answer with absolute clarity. Who am I choosing to be? Not who do you want to become, not what do you hope to achieve, but who are you declaring yourself to be right now, today, regardless of your current circumstances or past failures. This is not a wish or a goal, it is a decision about identity, and from this decision, all your behaviors must flow with perfect consistency. If you declare yourself a person of integrity, then you must act with integrity in every situation, even the small ones where no one would notice if you cut corners. If you declare yourself a builder of wealth, then you must make the financial decisions that builders of wealth make, even when those decisions require sacrifice or delayed gratification. If you declare yourself a person of discipline, then you must honor your commitments to yourself with absolute consistency, even when breaking them would be easier and no one else would know. Each time you align your behavior with your declared identity, you strike the hammer against the steel. Each time you choose the hard right over the easy wrong, you harden the beam. Each time you persist in being who you said you are even when circumstances make it difficult, you prove to yourself and to the universe that your identity is not a costume but a structure, not a performance but a reality. And as this steel beam solidifies through repeated strikes of the hammer, as your identity becomes unshakable through consistent identity-aligned behavior, something extraordinary happens to your confidence. It stops being something you have to generate and becomes something you simply are. You are confident not because you feel confident, but because you know who you are, and that knowledge is rooted in years of evidence that you are exactly who you claim to be. This is the confidence that attracts. This is the magnet that pulls opportunity, wealth, and respect toward you, not through manipulation or technique, but through the authentic presence of someone who has done the work of forging an unshakable identity and then living from that identity with perfect consistency. The world is desperate for such people because they are rare, and their rarity makes them valuable beyond measure. We must now turn our attention to a distinction that James Allen considered fundamental to understanding why some men rise while others stagnate, a distinction between two planes of existence that operate by entirely different laws and that produce entirely different outcomes. Most people live their entire lives on what Allen called the plane of appearance, that shallow realm where image is everything, where what you seem to be matters more than what you actually are, where the surface is polished and gleaming while the foundation rots unseen beneath it. A smaller number of people manage to migrate to what he called the plane of reality, that deeper realm where substance is everything, where what you actually are determines what you experience, where the foundation is solid even if the surface is unremarkable. The man who operates on the plane of appearance is obsessed with how he is perceived. He curates his image carefully, posts selectively on social media to create the impression of success even when his actual circumstances are desperate, dresses expensively even when he can barely afford rent, speaks confidently about opportunities and deals that exist only in his imagination. He is performing success rather than building it, investing all his energy into the facade while the substance of his character remains undeveloped and weak. This performance can fool others temporarily, and he mistakes their temporary approval for genuine respect. But it cannot fool the universe because the universe responds to what you are, not to what you appear to be. The tragedy of the plane of appearance is that the man who inhabits it often works incredibly hard at maintaining his image. He is not lazy, he is misdirected. He pours energy into crafting the perfect social media presence, into networking at events where he makes impressive-sounding small talk, into buying the symbols of success without building the substance that those symbols are supposed to represent. He mistakes activity for progress, visibility for achievement, and the approval of strangers for genuine respect. When his financial situation eventually collapses, or his carefully constructed image cracks under pressure, he is genuinely confused because he felt like he was doing all the right things. James Allen understood that the plane of appearance operates by the law of diminishing returns. The more you invest in image without building substance, the more energy you must expend to maintain that image as the gap between appearance and reality widens. You become trapped in an exhausting performance where you can never relax, never drop the mask, never admit struggle or uncertainty, because your entire position is built on illusion. This is why so many apparently successful people are miserable. They are living on the plane of appearance, trapped in a performance that requires constant energy to maintain, and that can collapse instantly if the truth of their actual circumstances becomes visible. By contrast, the man who operates on the plane of reality is concerned almost exclusively with substance. He does not care much about how he is perceived because he is focused on who he actually is becoming. He invests his energy not in polishing his image but in developing genuine capability, in building real skills, in forging actual character. He may appear unremarkable to those who judge by surface indicators. His clothes might be modest, his social media presence minimal, his networking limited to people he genuinely respects and wants to learn from, rather than people who can elevate his status. But beneath this unremarkable surface, something solid is being built. The law that governs the plane of reality is the law of compound returns. Every investment you make in actual capability, in genuine character, in real skill development pays dividends that multiply over time. Unlike the investments in appearance, which must be continuously refreshed and which produce no lasting value, investments in reality accumulate and compound. The man who spends 5 years genuinely mastering his craft while looking unremarkable has built something that cannot be taken away, something that will produce value for the rest of his life. The man who spent those same 5 years looking successful while building nothing has only memories of the temporary approval he received, and when circumstances force him to produce actual results, he has nothing to offer. James Allen was merciless in his assessment of those who try to live on the plane of appearance. He saw them not as victims, but as willing participants in their own deception, people who chose the easy path of performance over the hard path of substance, because performance produces immediate social rewards, while substance requires patience and produces rewards only after extended effort. But he also saw that this choice, while it might seem rational in the short term, is catastrophic in the long term because you cannot build a real life on a foundation of pretense. The migration from the plane of appearance to the plane of reality requires a death of sorts. The death of your attachment to how you are perceived, the death of your need for external validation, the death of your ego's demand to be seen as impressive or successful before you have actually become impressive or successful. This death is painful because your ego has been fed by the approval of others for so long that withdrawing from that approval feels like starvation. When you stop posting your curated highlights on social media, when you stop name-dropping and status signaling, when you stop trying to impress people with your plans and instead focus quietly on execution, there is a period where you feel invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. But this period of invisibility is not a bug, it is a feature. It is the necessary clearing away of false feedback that allows you to focus on substance. without the distortion that comes from constantly monitoring how others are reacting to your performance. The man who is building on the plane of reality is not concerned with quarterly approval ratings from his social circle. He is concerned with whether he is actually becoming more capable, whether his character is actually strengthening, whether his skills are actually developing. These things can only be measured over long time horizons, and they require the patience to work in obscurity while the compound returns accumulate invisibly. The magnetic charisma that James Allen spoke of, the quality that causes opportunities, wealth, and respect to flow towards certain individuals, is not the charisma of the performer on the plane of appearance. That charisma is flashy but hollow, impressive at first glance, but forgettable upon deeper acquaintance. True magnetic charisma is the quiet presence that radiates from someone who has built genuine substance, who is the same person in private as in public, who has nothing to hide because there is no gap between their appearance and their reality. This charisma does not shout for attention, it simply exists, and those who are capable of recognizing substance are drawn to it instinctively. Consider what happens when two men enter a room, one from the plane of appearance, one from the plane of reality. The first man is performing. His handshake is practiced, his eye contact calculated, his conversation designed to impress, his energy devoted to status signaling and image management. He is exhausting to be around because you can sense the performance, sense that he is not really present, but rather monitoring your reactions and adjusting his performance accordingly. The second man is simply present. His handshake is natural, his eye contact authentic, his conversation focused on substance rather than impression, his energy calm and centered because he is not trying to prove anything. There is a solidity to him that the first man lacks, and people with genuine discernment recognize this solidity and are drawn to it. Over time, over years and decades, the divergence between these two paths becomes catastrophic. The man on the plane of appearance ages into desperation as his energy to maintain the performance depletes, and as the accumulated weight of his deceptions and exaggerations becomes impossible to sustain. He is eventually exposed, not through dramatic revelation, but through the simple fact that he cannot produce real results when called upon to do so. The man on the plane of reality ages into mastery and authority as his accumulated substance reaches a critical mass where his reputation begins to reflect his actual capability. He does not need to perform because his track record speaks for itself. The choice between these planes is made not once but continuously, every day, in dozens of small decisions about where to invest your energy and attention. Every time you choose to work on actual skill development, rather than on crafting an impressive-looking post about your goals, you move toward the plane of reality. Every time you choose to honor a commitment to yourself that no one else knows about, rather than to broadcast an impressive intention that you may not follow through on, you move toward the plane of reality. Every time you choose to be honest about where you are, rather than to exaggerate your progress for the approval of others, you move toward the plane of reality. James Allen believed that the man who successfully migrates to the plane of reality and stays there, who builds his character and capability in obscurity while resisting the constant temptation to perform for approval, eventually reaches a state where his internal magnet becomes so powerful that external success becomes almost inevitable. Not because the universe magically rewards virtue, but because such a man has built genuine capability that creates real value, and value that is real eventually gets recognized and rewarded by those who matter, regardless of how impressive or unimpressive the surface appearance might be. This is the peace that comes from living on the plane of reality. You are no longer at war with your own conscience, no longer exhausted from maintaining a performance, no longer anxious about being exposed as less than you appear to be. You are simply who you are, and who you are is substantial, and that substance is magnetic in a way that no amount of performance can replicate. The journey from appearance to reality is the journey from boyhood to manhood, from performer to builder, from someone who needs validation to someone who validates himself through the quality of his work and the integrity of his character. It is not an easy journey because it requires the courage to become invisible for a season, to stop seeking approval, to work in obscurity while others are collecting likes and followers. But it is the only journey that leads to the kind of character that naturally attracts lasting success, genuine respect, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are exactly who you claim to be. The distinction between appearance and reality manifests most clearly in what James Allen identified as the source of true magnetic charisma, that quality which causes certain individuals to naturally attract loyalty, opportunity, and respect without apparent effort. The modern world has confused charisma with extroversion, with the ability to command a room through force of personality or polished presentation skills. But this confusion has led millions of people to pursue a false version of magnetism, while the real thing eludes them entirely. True charisma, the kind that changes lives and builds empires, does not come from personality training or communication techniques. It comes from what Allen called the peace of internal alignment, the state of being that exists when a man is not at war with his own conscience. Consider the mechanics of internal warfare and how it destroys magnetic potential. When you say you value health but consistently abuse your body, when you claim to prioritize your family but consistently choose work or distraction over presence, when you declare certain principles but violate them when they become inconvenient, you create what we might call the dissonance field. This field is a kind of static that surrounds you, a vibration of incoherence that others can sense even if they cannot consciously articulate what they are sensing. They feel vaguely uncomfortable around you, vaguely distrustful, vaguely uncertain about whether you can be relied upon, and this vague discomfort translates into a reluctance to offer you opportunities, to invest in your projects, to align themselves with your vision. The man at war with his conscience is constantly leaking energy. Part of his attention is always devoted to maintaining his rationalizations, to justifying his contradictions, to managing the cognitive dissonance between his stated values and his actual behavior. He cannot be fully present in any interaction because a portion of his mind is always monitoring for threats to his self-deception, always ready to defend or deflect when someone gets too close to exposing the gaps in his integrity. This divided attention is exhausting for him and repellent to others, though neither party may understand why the interaction feels so draining. By contrast, the man who has achieved internal alignment through years of closing the coherence gap, through consistent identity-level behavior, through migration from the plane of appearance to the plane of reality, radiates a completely different energy. There is no static, no dissonance, no sense of performance or concealment. He is the same person in every context because he has nothing to hide, no contradictions to manage, no gaps between his word and his deed that require defensive energy to maintain. This alignment manifests as a kind of calm presence that others find deeply attractive because it is so rare in a world full of people performing versions of themselves rather than being themselves. James Allen understood that this piece of internal alignment is not a feeling you cultivate through meditation or positive thinking, though these practices might support it. It is a state you earn through the systematic elimination of all the contradictions between your stated values and your lived behavior. Every time you identify a place where your actions contradict your principles and you choose to bring your actions into alignment rather than adjust your principles to justify your actions, you reduce the static. Every time you keep a promise you made to yourself, even when breaking it would be easier, you strengthen the coherence. Every time you admit a mistake rather than rationalize it, you clear away another source of internal warfare. The process is archaeological in nature. You are excavating through layers of self-deception, rationalization, and compromise that have accumulated over years, perhaps decades, and beneath all these layers, you are trying to find bedrock, the solid core of who you actually are when all the performance and pretense is stripped away. Most people never reach this bedrock because the excavation is too painful. It requires admitting how much of what they have been doing and saying has been driven by the need for approval, rather than by genuine principle. It requires facing the reality that they have been operating on the plane of appearance, performing a version of success or virtue rather than building the actual substance. But for those who persist in this excavation, who continue to identify and eliminate the contradictions, who gradually close all the gaps between stated value and lived behavior, something extraordinary happens. The internal warfare ceases. The constant monitoring and defending stops. The energy that was being drained by cognitive dissonance becomes available for other purposes. And most importantly, the static field disappears, replaced by what we might call a coherence field, a vibration of integrity that others respond to with trust and attraction, even if they cannot explain why. This coherence field is the source of true magnetic charisma. When you enter a room with this field fully active, people sense at a subconscious level that you are someone who can be trusted, someone who is the same person in private as in public, someone who will keep their commitments, because keeping commitments is not something you do, it is what you are. This sensing happens below language, below conscious analysis. It is a recognition that occurs at the level of instinct, and it manifests as an inexplicable draw toward you, a desire to hear what you have to say, to learn from you, to align with you, to support your projects. The man with a coherence field does not need to convince anyone of his trustworthiness, because his trustworthiness is self-evident in his presence. He does not need to make impressive claims about his capabilities, because his capability is obvious in how he carries himself. He does not need to seek approval, because he has something far more valuable: self-approval earned through the knowledge that he is living with integrity. And paradoxically, this lack of need for approval is precisely what makes him most attractive to those whose approval would actually matter. James Allen observed that the marketplace, despite all its apparent chaos and irrationality, has an uncanny ability over time to identify and reward genuine substance while exposing and punishing mere appearance. The performer might succeed temporarily through charisma, manufactured from communication techniques and strategic self-presentation, but this success is fragile and ultimately unsustainable because it is not rooted in actual capability or genuine character. The first serious challenge, the first situation that requires more than performance, exposes the hollowness and the entire facade collapses. But the man who has built genuine substance, who radiates the coherence field of internal alignment, builds success that compounds and endures because it is rooted in reality rather than appearance. His reputation grows not through self-promotion, but through the natural spread of respect from those who have directly experienced his integrity and capability. His opportunities multiply, not because he is chasing them, but because people with real resources and real problems seek him out. Having heard from trusted sources that he is someone who delivers, someone who can be trusted, someone whose presence and participation increases the probability of success. This is the ultimate validation of the character architecture that James Allen taught. When you build genuine substance, when you migrate fully to the plane of reality, when you eliminate all internal contradictions and achieve the peace of internal alignment, you become magnetic not through technique but through being, not through performance but through presence, not through what you say but through what you are. And this magnetism, this authentic charisma rooted in integrity rather than in impression management, is the force that naturally attracts wealth, respect, opportunity, and all the external markers of success that people try so desperately to chase through direct pursuit. The irony is complete. By ceasing to chase success and instead focusing entirely on building genuine character and capability, you become someone to whom success flows naturally. By stopping the performance and becoming real, you develop a presence that is genuinely impressive. By eliminating your need for approval through the earning of self-approval, you become someone whose approval others seek. This is not a trick or a technique. It is the inevitable outcome of living according to the law of character architecture, of understanding that internal transformation precedes external transformation, of accepting that you must become before you can have. We have traveled deep into the workshop of character, examining the materials, the techniques, the laws that govern the construction of a self capable of attracting rather than chasing the life you claim to desire. Now we must synthesize these teachings into a unified understanding, a single coherent framework that you can carry forward from this moment into the actual work of rebuilding your internal magnet. The synthesis is simple in statement, but demanding in execution. You must stop trying to fix the world and instead fix the man, understanding that when the man is repaired, the world repairs itself around him through the operation of natural law rather than through force or manipulation. James Allen's great contribution was not that he invented new techniques, but that he identified the underlying architecture that determines whether any technique will work. He understood that all the productivity systems, all the goal-setting frameworks, all the wealth-building strategies in the world will fail utterly if applied by a man whose character is cracked and whose internal magnet is reversed. The techniques are not the problem. The operator of the techniques is the problem. A fragmented man with the best strategy will produce fragmented results. A unified man with a modest strategy will produce extraordinary results because the man himself is the leverage point, not the strategy he employs. This is why the journey we have traced moves from thought to governance, to consistency, to identity, to alignment. Each stage builds upon the last. Each stage is necessary but not sufficient. Each stage prepares the foundation for the stage that follows. You cannot skip steps. You cannot achieve internal alignment without first establishing organized consistency. You cannot establish organized consistency without first achieving self-governance. You cannot achieve self-governance without first understanding that thought is the building material of character. The architecture is sequential and cumulative, and attempting to build the upper floors without first securing the foundation guarantees collapse. The shift from chasing to building is not merely a change in strategy, but a fundamental reorientation of your relationship to success. The chaser believes that his fulfillment exists somewhere outside himself, in circumstances yet to be achieved, in possessions yet to be acquired, in status yet to be attained. He is always running toward a future that never arrives, because the moment he achieves one goal, his sense of lack simply transfers to the next goal. This is the hedonic treadmill that keeps most people in perpetual dissatisfaction despite apparent success. The builder understands that fulfillment is not a destination, but a state of being that emerges from the process of becoming someone worthy of respect, starting with self-respect. He is not running toward anything. He is constructing something brick by brick, day by day, and he finds satisfaction in the work itself rather than in some imagined completion point. He knows that the palace of character is never truly finished, that there is always another level of mastery to pursue, another contradiction to eliminate, another aspect of his being to bring into alignment, and he embraces this endless work as the meaning of life rather than as an obstacle to be overcome so he can finally relax. From victim to architect is perhaps the most profound transformation a human being can undergo, because it represents the shift from being acted upon to acting, from being at the mercy of circumstance to being the creator of circumstance, from blaming the world for your condition to accepting full responsibility for your condition and therefore full power to change it. The victim is helpless, and his helplessness is sometimes comfortable because it absolves him of responsibility. The architect is powerful, and his power is sometimes terrifying because it removes all excuses and places the outcome entirely in his hands. James Allen was uncompromising in his insistence that you are the architect of your own destiny, not through the manifestation of wishes, but through the construction of character. He rejected entirely the victim narratives that dominate modern discourse, the endless litany of external factors and systemic forces that supposedly determine your outcomes. He acknowledged that circumstances vary, that some people start with advantages and others with disadvantages, but he insisted that regardless of your starting point, the quality of character you build determines the trajectory of your life. Two people can start from identical circumstances and end in completely different places, based entirely on the character one built while the other stagnated. This is not cruel, it is liberating. If external factors determined everything, you would be helpless. But because character determines trajectory, you have agency, you have power, you have the ability to change your future by changing yourself. And this ability exists regardless of your age, regardless of your past failures, regardless of how far you have fallen or how late you think it is to begin. The workshop of character is always open. The work is always available. The only question is whether you will enter the workshop and pick up the tools, or whether you will continue to stand outside, complaining about the unfairness of it all while others are building. The synthesis of power that James Allen offers is this. When you accept full responsibility for the construction site of your own character, when you select your thought materials with ruthless vigilance, when you govern your behavior with absolute consistency, when you forge an identity-level commitment to being someone of substance, when you migrate from the plane of appearance to the plane of reality, when you eliminate all the contradictions that create internal warfare, when you do all of this, your internal magnet reaches maximum power. And at maximum power, it does not need to chase anything. Everything you need begins to flow toward you because you have become someone whose character naturally attracts success rather than repels it. This is not magic. This is not the universe responding to your vibrations. This is the practical operation of how human society works. People with resources and opportunities are constantly looking for people they can trust, people who deliver results, people whose presence increases the probability of success. When you become such a person through the building of genuine character, you become visible to these people, and they direct resources and opportunities toward you not because you impressed them with a performance, but because you demonstrated through consistent action that you are someone who can be trusted with greater responsibility. The calendar will turn to 2026 in a matter of days, and with that turning will come a flood of resolutions, intentions and declarations from millions of people who believe that somehow the change of date will change their circumstances. It will not. The calendar changing means nothing. January 1st is not magic. The new year is not a reset button that erases your patterns and habits and character. You will enter 2026 as exactly the same person you are today unless you do the work to become someone different, and that work cannot wait for an arbitrary date. It must begin now, in this moment, with the recognition that you are not waiting for anything external to change, because nothing external needs to change. What needs to change is the man. What needs to be rebuilt is the internal architecture that has been generating your current results. What needs to be repaired is the magnet that has been either attracting or repelling the circumstances you experience. And this repair work, this rebuilding, this transformation cannot be delegated or postponed or somehow made easier through the discovery of a better technique. There is no better technique. There is only the work itself, the daily practice of thought selection, self-governance, organized consistency, identity alignment, and the migration from appearance to reality. James Allen would tell you that every day you delay beginning this work is another day of suffering under the consequences of a character you did not deliberately build, a magnet you did not intentionally forge. Your current circumstances are not random. They are the precise reflection of who you have been. If you want different circumstances, you must become a different person. And becoming a different person requires the courage to look honestly at who you currently are, to identify all the ways your current self is inadequate to your aspirations, and then to systematically rebuild that self according to the principles we have explored. This is not self-hatred. This is not toxic self-criticism. This is honest self-assessment in service of transformation. You cannot fix what you will not acknowledge. You cannot rebuild what you pretend is already fine. The first act of the architect is always brutal honesty about the current state of the structure, and for most people, that honest assessment reveals a foundation cracked with broken promises, walls weakened by undisciplined thinking, and a magnet so reversed by internal contradictions that it actively repels the success being consciously desired. But here is the message of empowerment that James Allen offers. None of this is permanent. Character is not fixed at birth. Your magnet can be repaired. Your foundation can be rebuilt. You are not doomed to remain who you have been. You have the power to become someone new through the systematic application of the principles of character architecture. This power is not theoretical or abstract. It is practical and available right now to anyone willing to do the work regardless of their past, their circumstances, or how far they have fallen. The work begins with the smallest possible commitment that you can honor with absolute certainty. Not a grand declaration of total transformation, not a dramatic announcement of how different you will be, but a single small promise that you make to yourself and that you keep tomorrow, regardless of how you feel when tomorrow arrives. Perhaps it is 5 minutes of reading. Perhaps it is 10 minutes of exercise. Perhaps it is simply getting out of bed when your alarm sounds rather than hitting snooze. The size of the commitment is irrelevant. What matters is that you keep it, that you demonstrate to yourself that you are becoming someone whose word means something, and then you do it again the next day, and the next. Without celebration, without drama, without posting about it or seeking validation for it. You are not performing transformation for an audience. You are building it in private, brick by brick, promise by promise, day by day. You are making deposits into your self-trust account. You are closing your coherence gap. You are beginning the migration from the plane of appearance to the plane of reality. And if you persist in this practice, if you continue keeping small promises while gradually expanding the scope of those promises as your capacity grows, you will experience over months and years a transformation so profound that you will barely recognize your former self. The man you are capable of becoming, the man with the powerful magnet, the man who operates on the plane of reality, the man who radiates the coherence field of internal alignment, that man already exists as a potential within you. He is not someone else, someone with advantages you lack or talents you were not given. He is you, the version of you that emerges when you do the work of character architecture consistently over time. Every person who has achieved this transformation started where you are now, uncertain and fragmented and struggling, and they reached the destination not through luck or special circumstances, but through the simple, unglamorous practice of keeping small promises until those promises accumulated into genuine character. James Allen's teaching is not comfortable because it removes all excuses and places full responsibility for your transformation in your own hands. You cannot blame your circumstances, your upbringing, your lack of opportunities, or any other external factor for who you are, because who you are is the result of the thoughts you have consistently thought and the actions you have consistently taken. If you are not who you want to be, it is because you have not yet done the work to become that person. This is brutal honesty, but it is also radical empowerment because it means that change is entirely within your control. The universe, or more precisely the network of social and economic systems you navigate, is not conspiring against you. It is not rigged. It is not unfair in the cosmic sense, even if specific situations involve unfairness. It is simply reflecting back to you the quality of character you are broadcasting through your internal magnet. If you are broadcasting fragmentation, chaos, untrustworthiness, and weakness, the universe reflects back circumstances that match that broadcast. If you repair your magnet through the building of genuine character, the universe will begin to reflect back circumstances that match your new broadcast, not immediately, not magically, but gradually and inevitably as the compound effects of your transformation accumulate. This is the promise, and it is unbreakable. Build the man and the life will follow. Repair the magnet, and what you have been chasing will begin to chase you. Stop performing success and start building substance, and genuine success will emerge as the natural consequence of who you have become. This is not hope. This is law, as reliable as gravity, as inevitable as compound interest. The law of character architecture operates whether you believe in it or not, whether you understand it or not, whether you like it or not. Your only choice is whether you will operate according to this law consciously, deliberately rebuilding your character according to sound principles, or whether you will continue to operate unconsciously, allowing your character to be shaped randomly by circumstances and impulses, and then wondering why your results remain random and disappointing. We are building a legion of disciplined men for this new cycle, men who understand that the external chaos of the world can only be navigated successfully by those who have achieved internal order, men who recognize that complaining about circumstances is the occupation of victims while building character, is the occupation of architects, men who have stopped waiting for the world to give them permission or opportunity, and have instead taken full responsibility for constructing themselves into the kind of men that the world must take seriously. This is not a call to join a movement or follow a guru. This is a call to enter the workshop of your own character and begin the solitary, unglamorous, absolutely necessary work of rebuilding yourself according to the principles James Allen identified. You will do this work alone because character cannot be built by committee or through collective action. You will do this work in obscurity Because genuine transformation happens in private, long before it becomes visible in public. You will do this work without immediate reward, because the compound effects of character building require time to manifest. But if you do this work, if you really commit to it with the understanding that this is not a month-long challenge or a year-long project, but a lifetime practice of becoming, you will reach a point where you look back at your former self with a kind of compassionate bewilderment, wondering how you ever lived in such chaos, wondering how you ever tolerated such internal contradiction, wondering how you ever believed that success could be chased rather than built. And from that vantage point of transformation, you will understand viscerally what James Allen was teaching, that the external life is always and only a reflection of the internal character, and that therefore the fastest path to changing your circumstances is not to manipulate the external world, but to rebuild your internal world until it becomes a foundation strong enough to support the life you desire. The challenge is simple. Pick up the trowel and mortar. Stop reading about transformation and start building it. Stop planning your improvement and start executing the smallest possible version of it. Stop waiting for the perfect moment and recognize that this moment, right now, is the only moment that exists, and therefore the only moment in which you can begin. Your past is gone. Your future is not yet here. You have only now, and what you do now, the thought you select, the promise you keep, the action you take, is the brick you are laying in the wall of your destiny. If you are ready to stop performing and start building, if you are ready to migrate from the plane of appearance to the plane of reality, if you are ready to close your coherence gap and repair your internal magnet, declare it. Not to me, not to an audience, but to yourself in the privacy of your own consciousness, where such declarations carry weight, because there is no external validation to dilute the commitment. Say to yourself, I am rebuilding the architect. I am taking full responsibility for the construction site of my character. I am no longer a victim of circumstances. I am the creator of circumstances through the systematic building of genuine substance. And then tomorrow morning, when your alarm sounds, when your first small promise demands to be kept, when your first opportunity to honor your word to yourself arrives, keep it. Not because you feel like it, not because it is convenient, not because someone will notice, but because you are becoming someone whose word is law, someone whose commitments mean something, someone whose character is solid rather than fragmented. This is the work. This is the only work that matters. This is the law of character architecture, and it is unforgiving but also unbreakable. Become the man, and the man will attract the life. There are no shortcuts. There are no hacks. There is only the workshop, the tools, the materials, and your willingness to do the work regardless of how long it takes or how difficult it becomes. The architect is not born. He is built, brick by brick, thought by thought, promise by promise, day by day, and the time to begin building is now.